I was 29 when it happened, but it still replays in my head like a scene I can't fast forward through. My name's Josh, and if you asked most people who knew me growing up, they'd probably say I was a quiet kid. Not shy exactly, just careful. I listened more than I talked, observed more than I participated. That's probably why I noticed all the cracks before the house started falling apart. My parents, Carla and Dennis, were the kind of people who liked things to look perfect. They lived for appearances. If something went wrong, they didn't fix it, they covered it up. Painted over the damage, rearranged the furniture, smiled for the neighbors, and hoped no one asked too many questions. I spent most of my life pretending I didn't see the peeling paint. We were never a Hallmark card family, but I used to think we were at least normal. My dad worked in corporate real estate, always immaculately dressed, always with his phone pressed to his ear like it was stitched there. My mom stayed home, but treated her social calendar like a full-time job. Fundraisers, brunches, anniversary parties, charity events where everyone wore the exact same shade of navy. They were very into the idea of legacy, of building a life that other people admired. The problem was, their definition of admirable didn't leave much room for people who didn't fit the mold. I was a late bloomer, I guess. Struggled in school, didn't go to college right away, spent a couple years floating around, doing part-time work and trying to figure out what I was even good at. Eventually, I found my thing, custom woodwork, actually. Cabinets, furniture, decorative pieces. There was something grounding about it, something honest. You couldn't fake a dovetail joint. Either it held or it didn't. I liked that. By the time I turned 28, I was running my own shop with a small but steady list of clients. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of what I'd built. My parents weren't. They never outright said it, but I could see it in the way my mom would describe my work to her friends like it was a quirky hobby. Josh is doing his little woodworking thing. It keeps him busy, she'd say, waving it off like I was building birdhouses in a shed behind the house. My dad barely asked questions anymore, just offered half-hearted, "That's nice" comments whenever I told him about a big project or a client I landed. I stopped trying to impress them after a while. I figured it was just one of those things. You get older, and your parents stop understanding you. Happens to everyone, right? But then came the anniversary party. It was their 35th, and they were going all out. Rented out a private event hall, black tie, catered dinner, live music, the works. My mom sent me an invitation in the mail, even though we spoke on the phone a couple times a month. It was formal, engraved, the kind of thing you'd expect from a wedding. I actually laughed when I opened it. There was even an RSVP card with a return envelope, like I was just another guest. Still, I filled it out, checked the attending box, and mailed it back the next day. I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just another fancy event, and I was ready to play along. Put on a suit, show up, smile, shake hands, pose for photos. That was the role, right? The dutiful son. I could manage that for one night. I even offered to build them a custom gift, a carved wood portrait of the two of them, based on one of their wedding photos. It took me over 20 hours to get the detailing just right. I planned to hand it to them that night, thinking maybe it would be a nice surprise. A rare moment of connection. The party was set for Saturday. The Thursday before, I got a call from my mom. It wasn't unusual. She always liked to check in before big events. She said she wanted to go over a few minor details before the party. I assumed she meant schedule or seating or something trivial, so I agreed to stop by the house after work. That's when things started to unravel. I got there around 6. My dad was in his office, and my mom led me into the kitchen like we were about to have a normal conversation. But then she glanced toward the hallway, lowered her voice, and said, "We just wanted to talk to you about something delicate." She said, "we," but it was just her speaking for a while. My dad eventually joined us, leaning against the fridge like he was trying not to get involved, but knew he'd have to back her up eventually. My mom smoothed her dress like she was on stage, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "Josh, we were thinking it might be best if, at the party, you didn't tell anyone that you're our son." I actually blinked like I misheard her. "What?" She gave a tight smile. "Just for the evening. It's complicated, and we really don't want to have to explain your situation right now." My situation. That was the word that hit me hardest. Like I was a problem they needed to work around. A scheduling conflict. Something unsightly to be edited out of the picture. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to jump in and say she was exaggerating, but he didn't. He just sighed and said, "It's just easier, Josh. A lot of our friends from the city are coming. They have certain expectations. Expectations. I repeated, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. What does that even mean? My mom touched my arm like she was offering comfort, but it felt more like a bribe. It's just one night. Just say you're a family friend. Or one of the vendors. No one will question it. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. You want me to lie about being your son so your friends don't have to know what? That I didn't go to Yale? That I build furniture for a living? They didn't answer. My dad just looked away, and my mom's mouth twitched like she was about to cry. Like she was the victim. And in that moment, something in me just shut off. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the carving or storm out. I just stood up, walked to the door, and said, "You don't have to worry about me being at your party." My mom called after me, her voice wobbling. "Josh, don't be dramatic." But I was already gone. I got in my truck, drove home, and put the carving in the back of my closet where it's been ever since. They tried to call a couple times after that. Left voicemails that were equal parts pleading and guilt-tripping. I didn't answer. Didn't go to Christmas that year. Or Easter. Or my dad's birthday. Eventually the calls stopped. But the messages didn't. They just moved through other people. My aunt. My cousin. Even my childhood neighbor who ran into my mom at the grocery store and asked why she never saw me around anymore. "She says you're being cruel," my aunt told me over coffee one day. "That you've cut them off for no reason." For no reason. I didn't correct her. I just smiled, nodded, and said I had a lot of work to do at the shop. But lately, they've started reaching out again. It's been 3 years. 3 full years of silence. And now suddenly they want to talk. To clear the air. They don't understand why I'm still harboring resentment. What they don't realize is, I'm not angry anymore. Not in the way they think. I'm planning something. And it's going to be quiet. Precise. Just like everything else I build. I didn't block their numbers right away. For a while after the party incident, I just let the calls go to voicemail. I'd stare at the screen, watching mom's cell or dad's cell light up like ghosts I hadn't buried properly, my thumb hovering over the screen, frozen. Sometimes I'd listen to the messages. Most were short. "Josh, call us back." Or, "Josh, this has gone on long enough." The worst ones were the ones where my mom cried. She always cried strategically, never at funerals, never during real family fights. But voicemail? That was her stage. The first time I heard her say, "I just don't understand why you're being so cold," I nearly threw my phone across the room. Not because of what she said, but because of how convincingly hurt she sounded. It was almost impressive, the performance. If I hadn't been there in the kitchen that night, I might have believed her myself. But I was there. I remember the temperature in the room, the light from the pendant lamp reflecting off the granite counter. I remember how they couldn't even say the words "my son" without choking on them. Like it was dirty. Like it wasn't convenient. And I remember what came after. At first, I thought they'd leave me alone. That maybe, deep down, they understood they'd crossed a line. But that was naive. My parents didn't apologize. They reframed. They rewrote the script and then handed it out to the rest of the cast like nothing had happened. The rewriting started small. I'd get texts from my aunt that said things like, "Heard you couldn't make it to the party. Your mom was so sad you had to cancel last minute." I didn't reply. Then came the guilt-laced updates. "Your dad was really hoping to see you at Easter brunch. He kept checking the door like you'd walk in." As if I was the one ghosting them without explanation. It escalated from there. About 6 weeks after the party, I stopped by my favorite cafe on a Sunday morning. Just wanted a quiet cup of coffee and maybe a muffin, nothing dramatic. But the barista, Jamie, someone I'd chatted with a dozen times before, friendly, casual, gave me this wide-eyed look and said, "Hey, I met your mom the other day." I paused mid-reach for my wallet. "Really?" She came in with some of her friends from the club. "I mentioned you made our custom shelves," and she Jamie hesitated. "Well," she laughed. Said something like, "Oh, Josh always was good with tools. He just never quite figured out how to turn it into a real job." I froze. I felt the flush rise up my neck, slow and hot. Jamie looked uncomfortable. I just thought it was weird. I assumed she'd be, I don't know, proud. I managed to laugh. "Yeah," I said. "You'd think." I walked out of there and didn't taste my coffee for hours. That night, I sat in my shop long after closing, just sanding the same piece of mahogany until my knuckles ached. I wasn't even working on a project. I just needed something to do with my hands so I didn't punch a wall. They were embarrassed by me. Fine. That I could live with. But to mock me? To diminish what I'd built in front of strangers? in my own community? That was something else entirely. I told myself I'd cut them off completely after that. No more calls. No more messages. I blocked their numbers, unfollowed them on social media, deleted our last family photo from my camera roll. I even boxed up the old family albums I'd kept, tossed them into a storage bin in the attic, out of sight, out of mind. But, of course, they didn't stop. They just changed tactics. It started with my sister, Emily. Emily and I had never been particularly close. She was the golden child, straight A's, Ivy League, married at 25 to some investment banker with a jawline you could cut glass on. She lived in a penthouse apartment in the city, posted professional family portraits like it was a competitive sport, and hosted gender reveal parties with full catering. The last time we talked one-on-one, she asked if I ever considered upskilling into something a little more scalable. She called me out of the blue one morning. I didn't recognize the number. "Josh," she said, as if we were mid-conversation. "Can we talk?" I almost hung up. "What do you want?" I said. "Mom's been crying," she said immediately. "She doesn't understand why you're freezing her out. She asked me to pretend I wasn't her son, Emily." I snapped. "At their anniversary party. Do you get how insane that is?" There was a pause. "She didn't mean it like that." I laughed, bitter. How did she mean it? She didn't want to answer questions. You know how their friends can be. They don't understand people who take unconventional paths. That's not my problem. She says you've always been sensitive. My jaw clenched. Right. I'm the problem. "Josh," she sighed, as if she were talking to a stubborn child. "You're punishing them." "For what?" "Not bragging about your side hustle." "It's not a side hustle," I said tightly. "It's a business. A successful one. I employ people. I pay taxes. I have repeat clients. You build things, Josh," she interrupted. "That's great. Really. But they come from a different generation. You can't expect them to understand everything." And there it was. The dismissal. The condescension. Like my life was a cute little detour from the real world. Like I was the eccentric uncle who shows up to Thanksgiving with weird gifts and stories no one listens to. I ended the call without saying goodbye. After that, I avoided every family gathering. If someone in the family had a baby, I sent a card. If someone graduated, I mailed a gift. But I didn't show up. Not because I was bitter, but because I couldn't stomach the idea of sitting across from people who saw me as a punchline in their polished lives. But somehow, my silence only made them louder. They started telling people I was depressed, that I was going through a phase, that I was struggling to find direction. My mom even told a mutual friend I'd been laid off and was working on getting back on my feet. It was like they couldn't conceive of a version of me that was okay without their approval. If I wasn't showing up for their events, if I wasn't playing the dutiful son, then I must be floundering, failing, lost. But I wasn't. I was doing better than ever. My business was thriving. I'd hired a second full-time employee, started taking commissions from out-of-state clients. A design blog featured one of my pieces in a top 10 craftsmen to watch article. I wasn't just surviving, I was building. But none of that mattered to them, because it wasn't their version of success. Then came the final straw. I got a letter in the mail. Not a call, not an email. An actual letter, on thick cardstock, hand-addressed in my mom's cursive. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. Inside was an invitation. To my sister's vow renewal. She and Mr. Glassjaw were having a massive, expensive redo of their wedding for their 10-year anniversary. Destination. Full weekend itinerary. Black tie optional. And at the bottom, in delicate gold script, was a line that made my stomach drop. Please respect the couple's wishes for a child-free, vendor-only event. Family members attending in a working capacity should check in with staff on arrival. Working capacity. I read it 3 times before I even blinked. There was no mistake. It was deliberate. I wasn't being invited as a brother. I was being invited as staff. I flipped the card over. Tucked into the envelope was a small note. "Josh, Emily would love it if you'd contribute a few decorative pieces for the reception. Something rustic, elegant, your style. She says it would mean a lot. Let us know what you'd need in terms of materials or delivery." There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just an assumption that I'd be so flattered to be included, even in a lesser role, that I'd jump at the opportunity. That was when something in me changed. Before I was hurt, disappointed, maybe even embarrassed. But now I was done. And for the first time in years, I felt calm. I had no intention of building anything for that wedding, but I was going to give them something. something they couldn't ignore, something they'd never see coming. But to pull it off, I'd have to play the long game and wait for the perfect moment to begin. The note about the vow renewal sat on my workbench for days. I didn't even move it, just let it sit there under a layer of sawdust, warped slightly from a coffee ring I didn't bother to wipe up. Every time I looked at it, I felt this strange mix of disbelief and clarity, like I was finally seeing something that had always been there. It was like someone turned the lights on in a room I'd been sleeping in my whole life. It's funny what happens when the last thread snaps. For so long, I'd been walking this tightrope, trying to be the bigger person, trying to prove myself without being too loud about it, trying to find a version of myself that my parents could accept. Not love, just accept. But the moment I read that invitation, I realized something brutal. I could win a design award, open 10 stores, make $1 million from a single piece of art, and they would still introduce me as the one who works with his hands. Because they needed me to be less. They needed a contrast to make themselves look shinier by comparison. So I let the thread go. I canceled everything for a week. Not publicly, not dramatically. I just told my clients I needed a short break to handle a personal project, then locked the shop door and shut off my phone. I went off the grid in my own tiny world. And I broke down. The kind of breakdown that doesn't look dramatic to anyone outside, but feels like an earthquake inside. I stopped sleeping, ate garbage, got stuck in these loops of memories. Me as a kid showing my mom a wonky birdhouse I built in 4th grade, and her saying, "Well, maybe you'll be better at numbers." Me trying to hug my dad after winning a local art competition at 16, and him giving me a stiff pat on the shoulder like I was a stranger who'd spilled something on his shirt. There were so many little cuts. I just ignored them for years, convinced myself they didn't add up to anything serious. But now I was bleeding all at once. One night, I found myself sitting in my truck in the dark outside the shop, just sitting. I didn't want to go home, didn't want to go anywhere. I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking, maybe I'll just drive until the tank runs out. But I didn't. I got out, walked back inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the shop floor for what felt like hours. No music, no phone, just me, the smell of wood shavings, and the sound of my own breathing. I wish I could say there was some lightning bolt moment, that I suddenly stood up and knew what I had to do. But it wasn't like that. It was slower, softer, more like a tide rising around your ankles before you even notice it. It started with one piece of wood, a large slab of black walnut I'd been saving for something special. I ran my hand over the grain and felt this little flicker in my chest, like a spark under ash. I didn't know what I was going to make, but I knew I needed to make something. Not for a client, not for Instagram, not for anyone else, just for me. I worked through the night. No plan, no sketches, just movement. I carved, sanded, shaved, burned, polished. I let the piece become what it wanted to be, something abstract, something raw. By sunrise, I had a sculpture that looked like nothing I'd ever made before. It wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't practical, but it meant something. It felt like me. I stared at it for a long time, and I realized something. I wasn't broken. I'd just been trying to fit into the wrong frame. That was the beginning. The next few weeks were quiet, but something inside me had shifted. I started waking up earlier, drinking real breakfast instead of convenience store coffee. I reopened the shop and told my employees I'd be taking a back seat on client work for a bit. I needed space to make something different. They understood. I went back to basics. Spent hours studying joints, techniques, things I hadn't revisited since my early days. I took out books, watched old videos, messed around with tools I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't about perfection, it was about rediscovery. And I made a rule. Every day, I had to make one thing that would never be sold. A spoon, a box, a carved panel, a sculpture, something that existed just to exist. It was like therapy. I didn't tell anyone about this phase. Not my friends. Not even the other artisans I occasionally collaborated with. It was too personal, too sacred. But every time I finished something, I felt like I was putting a broken piece of myself back into place. And slowly, the noise from my family began to fade. Sure, I still heard about them. My cousin tagged me in a family group photo at my niece's birthday party, one I hadn't been invited to. My mom posted a long, dramatic message about estrangement and praying for healing that was clearly about me, even though she didn't use my name. My aunt left a voicemail saying, "Just so you know, Your father had to explain to everyone why you weren't at the renewal, and it was humiliating. I didn't respond, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't craving their approval. I was mourning it. There's a difference. And once I let go of the hope that they'd ever see me for who I really was, something amazing happened. I started seeing myself more clearly. I started getting bolder with my designs. Riskier. One day I posted a picture of a jagged live-edge coffee table that looked more like a sculpture than furniture, and it went viral. A week later, I got a call from a gallery in Seattle asking if I'd be open to exhibiting some of my more experimental pieces. I said yes. Then came the interview. A podcast for young artists asked me to talk about my journey, how I built a business without formal training, what it was like working solo, what my biggest obstacles were. I thought about saying no, but then I realized I wanted to say it out loud. I told my story, not the cleaned-up version I used to tell at dinner parties. The real one. I talked about growing up in a house where creative meant directionless, where love was conditional on success, and success was defined by someone else's blueprint. I talked about how hard it was to undo those voices in your head, to stop measuring yourself against people who never really saw you in the first place. The episode got thousands of downloads. I started getting messages from other artists, other black sheep, people who felt invisible in their own families. They told me my story made them feel seen. That meant more to me than any award ever could. I started feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I wasn't healed. Not completely. There were still moments. Walking past a father and son at the hardware store, hearing a familiar song from a family vacation. That made something twist in my chest. But I wasn't drowning anymore. I'd found land. And that's when the email came. It was from my sister's event planner. A bright, cheery message with bullet points and exclamation marks. She wanted to follow up about delivery expectations for the custom pieces I'd agreed to provide for the vow renewal reception. I stared at the screen, stunned. They'd gone ahead and told people I was contributing, probably to look generous, probably to make themselves feel less like the villains. The email included photos of the space, notes about the color scheme, and even a suggested timeline for installation. We've set aside a lovely little table for you near the service entrance. The message read, you'll have a clear view of the decorative arch you helped create. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop, took a walk, and that night, I sat in my apartment, sipping tea and looking around at my walls, at the shelves I built, the lamp I designed, the pieces that told my story better than words ever could. And I smiled, because now I knew exactly what to do, and I had just the right piece to do it with. But first, I needed to pay someone a visit, and I needed to bring a box with me. Not the kind you'd expect, but the kind you don't forget. I didn't rush it. That was the first part of the plan, don't rush. For once, I wasn't reacting to them. I was creating something. And I knew better than anyone that anything worth building takes time. Revenge, like craftsmanship, is all in the precision. After I got that email from the event planner, chirpy, fake-friendly, utterly oblivious, I knew they had no clue what was coming. They genuinely thought I'd either show up and smile like a trained dog, or quietly sulk and stay away, letting them control the narrative again. They didn't know the version of me that had come out of those long, silent weeks in the workshop. They didn't know what I'd learned. And they had no idea what I was capable of. I started by calling an old client, Naomi, who ran a boutique event space downtown. She'd once hired me to design a series of minimalist but eye-catching wood installations for her venue, and we'd stayed friendly since. She was sharp, detail-oriented, and had her ear to the ground for everything that happened in the city's upscale event circuit. I figured if anyone knew more about my sister's vow renewal than me, it'd be her. She answered on the second ring. Josh? Wow, I haven't heard from you in forever. You okay? Better than ever, I said, and meant it. Actually, I was hoping to pick your brain. You got a minute? Sure. What's up? Emily Carter's event. Her 10-year vow renewal. You know anything about it? Naomi let out a groan. Oh, that circus? Yeah, unfortunately. She booked the Anders estate and demanded custom everything. Took my assistant 3 hours just to walk her through the flooring options she didn't even end up using. What? Just curious, I said, pacing the shop slowly. You wouldn't happen to have a layout of the venue, would you? Josh, she said, her tone shifting, you're not thinking about taking on that nightmare, are you? Not officially, I said with a grin. But let's just say I'm preparing something. I'd love to see how the place is set up. especially the back entrance, service quarters, storage areas. Naomi laughed, the kind of laugh that says I don't know what you're planning, but I want to see it happen. Give me 10 minutes. I'll email over the blueprints and the vendor list. Naomi, I said before she hung up, thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said. Just make sure whatever you're planning leaves a mark. I had my map. Next, I needed a team. I didn't want to involve anyone close to my family. Too risky. Too many chances for word to leak. Instead, I reached out to people who knew me. People who'd been in the trenches with me during the early days of the shop. I called Mason, my first hire, an ex-con turned artisan with the best eye for detail I'd ever seen. Then I called Liv, a freelance photographer and prop designer I'd collaborated with on a few gallery installations. She was chaotic in the best way, creative, resourceful, and excellent at staging things just the right way to provoke reaction. I didn't tell them everything. Not at first. I invited them over to the shop one Friday evening and laid out a large cloth over the main bench. Beneath it were 3 sketches and a series of labeled mock-ups. A sculpture, a pedestal, and a hidden compartment with a sliding mechanism, all built from scratch. This, I said, lifting the cloth, is going to the vow renewal. Liv raised an eyebrow. Your sister's event? Mason crossed his arms. I thought you weren't going. I'm not, I said. But this is. I watched their eyes scan the designs. Confusion slowly morphed into realization. Is that what I think it is? Liv asked, pointing to the carved center. I nodded. You want to display that at the event? Mason said, half impressed, half horrified. No, I said. I want them to ask for it. That was the key. This couldn't look like sabotage. Couldn't be sabotage, technically. It had to be something they welcomed. Something they bragged about. Something they posed with for photos, completely unaware of the trap beneath their feet. It had to be a gift. And not just any gift, a masterpiece. I got to work. The sculpture took nearly 3 weeks. I worked in secret, after hours, under a tarp even inside the shop. It was made of walnut and white ash, curved into a modern, asymmetrical shape that looked abstract from afar. But up close, you could see the truth. Carved into the inner edge were names, dates, phrases, all from our family's history. Some innocent, Josh's first desk, 1998. Others more pointed. He's not really our son's son. He builds things, he doesn't do things. You're being overly emotional. I didn't quote anyone directly, but I didn't need to. Every word was etched with surgical precision. You had to look for them. You had to get close. The deeper you stared, the more uncomfortable it got. But on the surface, it looked stunning, elegant, refined, museum quality, even. I built a minimalist pedestal to go with it. Black oak with a simple plaque reading, Legacy, commissioned for the Carter family, 2025. I even sealed it in a crate with a branded tag, listing my shop as the creator, along with a fake backstory about how Emily had personally requested the piece months in advance and how it represented heritage, growth, and the transformation of natural material into art. I knew exactly who to send it to, the event planner. I composed a short, confident email, said I was following up on the family's request and delivering a featured centerpiece. No charge, of course. A gesture of celebration. I attached polished photos, buzzwords, descriptions that made it sound expensive. Sent it off with a note that it would arrive the night before the event and required minimal setup. She replied in 20 minutes. It's exquisite. I'll reserve a prime spot near the welcome table. Just like that, it was in. I spent the next 2 weeks finalizing the mechanism. See, the real trick wasn't the sculpture. It was what was inside the pedestal. A small drawer, perfectly hidden, locked in place with a magnetic switch. Inside, a hardbound photo album, custom-made, leather cover, elegant, and on every page, a different snapshot of what my family didn't want seen. Pictures of my dad shaking hands with people he later smeared. Screenshots of social media comments my mom left on parenting forums under fake names, complaining about her underachiever son. Photos of me at public art installations they never attended but told people they supported. Even the invoice where they quietly refunded a donation I made in their name, because it didn't align with their professional image. I included a printed copy of that party invitation, the one where I was asked to act like I wasn't their son. I framed it like art. And on the final page, a handwritten note. This is who I am. This is who you are. You taught me to value image over truth. But I've chosen something different. I've chosen honesty. Let's see how it feels for you. I sealed the drawer, reset the magnet, and sent the sculpture on its way. The event was in 5 days. I didn't go. I had no intention of showing my face. That would have made it messy. Personal. No, I wanted this to unfold slowly, like watching a stain spread on silk. But I did send someone. Liv. She went in with a camera rig hidden in a brooch. Said she was helping one of the floral vendors, got a pass, and strolled in like she belonged there. She even wore one of the family colors, silver blue. She called me 30 minutes into the reception. They love it, she whispered. The sculpture's front and center. Your mom gave a speech about how it symbolizes strength and family legacy. I nearly choked. She's telling people you made it for them months ago. Said it's a representation of how far we've come as a family. Mason, sitting next to me in the shop, burst out laughing. I shook my head, stunned. The irony was so thick you could spread it with a chisel. And the drawer? I asked. Still sealed, she said. But there's a little kid crawling around near the base. He's been knocking on it like it's hollow. I give it 20 minutes. I hung up and waited. And somewhere, deep inside me, I felt it click. Not revenge. Not yet. But alignment. The pieces were in place. And the real show? It hadn't even started yet. The first text I got was from my aunt. It came about 3 hours after the reception was scheduled to start. Just one line. What did you do? No context. No follow-up. Just those 4 words. I didn't answer. A few minutes later came a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another one. Then another. And then silence. For about an hour. I knew that silence. It wasn't confusion. It was coordination. They were regrouping. Liv uploaded the footage that night. Nothing public, of course. Just a private Dropbox folder labeled Inheritance. It had everything I needed. The moment the sculpture was wheeled in. The moment the photographer asked them to pose with it. My mother's fake smile. My father's carefully measured nod. Emily doing a breathy explanation to her guests about how it represents the core values of our family, strength, elegance, tradition. And then, the moment. A kid, maybe 6 or 7, bored and fidgety, noticed the side panel and started knocking on it. Lightly at first, then harder. Liv got the whole thing. You see the child tap one particular spot again and again. Then crouch down, fiddling with something. A guest crouches with him, an older man, maybe a family friend. He runs his hand along the seam. Looks up curious. Calls someone over. A few moments later, one of the staff opens it. The magnetic switch slides loose. And the drawer opens. That's when the video gets quiet. You can feel the air change. A woman leans over, picks up the album, and opens it to the first page. Her smile slowly drains. Then she flips. And flips again. Her face tells the story. By the 5th page, she glances around, then hurries over to my sister. Emily, radiant in a pale blue gown, takes the book with a polite, confused smile. Still posing for photos. Still floating on her little cloud of self-importance. She reads the first page. And everything stops. Her expression collapses. Not dramatically. Not instantly. Just wilts. Slowly. Like a dying flower. She flips another page. Then another. By page 6, she's walking briskly off camera, book clutched to her chest like a bomb. You don't see where she goes. But the whispers begin. That's the thing about events like this. They're performances. And performances depend on control. Lighting. Timing. Mood. Control the stage, you control the story. But the moment the audience senses something real, something raw, everything unravels. Within minutes, you can see guests begin to murmur. Turn to each other. Point toward the sculpture. One woman takes a closer look and visibly flinches. A man leans down and starts tracing one of the carved phrases with his finger, his eyebrows raised. Then someone snaps a photo. A few more follow. Phones come out. People start reading aloud. The phrase, "He's not really our son's son," echoes faintly through the video. And then, like a wave, you see them realize. This wasn't a tribute. This was a confession. And they displayed it. Framed it. Bragged about it. I didn't need to be there. I could feel the room folding in on itself through the screen. Liv did one final pan across the reception hall before heading out. My mother is off to the side, near the catering station, talking rapidly to 2 elderly women with horrified expressions. My father stands stiffly near the sculpture, glaring at it like it betrayed him. Someone tries to cover the pedestal with a tablecloth, but it's too late. The photos are out. The story is already leaving the room. And Emily? She's gone. I watched the footage twice. Then I deleted it. It had served its purpose. The fallout was fast and deliciously silent. That's what I'd hoped for. No screaming matches. No tear-stained apologies. Just consequences. The next day, my parents called me. I didn't answer. They tried from their landline. From burner numbers. From Emily's number. Nothing. Then came the email. Subject line, "We need to talk." The body of the message was short. "Josh, what you did last night was cruel and humiliating. You embarrassed this family in front of hundreds of people. Whatever point you were trying to make, you went too far. Please call us so we can discuss next steps. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Dad." I stared at the screen for a while. Then I typed 2 words. Message received. And hit send. That was all. No explanations. No arguments. No emotional monologues. They didn't deserve my voice anymore. 2 days later, my mother posted a carefully crafted statement on her social media. Sometimes, even those we love can act out in hurtful ways. Families are complicated. We ask for privacy and understanding during this time. She turned off comments. But screenshots made their way around. Some of her friends sent me messages. One said, "I never knew you went through all that. I'm so sorry." Another said, "The piece was hauntingly beautiful. I don't think I'll ever forget it." And that meant more than any forced apology ever could. Emily never reached out. But I heard through the grapevine that she canceled her honeymoon. That she spent the next week ghosting every friend who was at the event. That her husband, Mr. Glassjaw, was furious she hadn't vetted the piece more closely. Apparently, his firm took some hits too. A few clients weren't thrilled to be associated with a family that publicly disowned their son and got caught lying about it. Couldn't have happened to nicer people. Meanwhile, my business exploded. I got 5 new commission requests within a week. Most from people who saw photos of the sculpture online and wanted something with similar emotional depth. A design magazine ran a feature titled "The Artist Who Exposed His Family with One Sculpture." I didn't ask for the title, but I didn't argue with it either. I was invited to do a TEDx talk. Declined. Got a grant offer. Accepted. My waiting list grew by 6 months. But none of that was the real win. The real win came on a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the event. I was in my shop, working on a new piece, something smooth and warm, shaped like a slow breath, when there was a knock at the door. Not the main entrance. The side one. The private one. I wiped my hands, opened the door, and there was my neighbor's kid. The one who always biked past my shop on the way to school. He was holding a school project, a lopsided jewelry box, barely held together with glue. He looked nervous. "Hey," he said. "My mom said you make stuff." "Like good stuff." "I do my best," I said, crouching down. He hesitated. "This fell apart. Do you think you could help me fix it? I want to give it to my grandma." I looked at the box. One hinge was crooked. The lid didn't sit flat. But the effort was there. The intention. I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I think we can fix it." And as I held that small, broken box in my hands, I realized something. Sometimes the best thing you can build is the version of yourself that no one ever thought you could be, even if it means breaking everything that came before. They asked me not to tell anyone I was their son. Now the world knows exactly who they are.